Welcome, everyone. This is Anique with CISCRP. We'll just wait a minute or so for everybody to join, and then we'll get started. Welcome to those who are joining. We're just waiting a few more seconds before we get started, just to let everybody join. So we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, and a warm welcome to everyone. And thank you so much for making a little bit of time during your day today to join us. We're very excited to bring to you today some of the highlights from our latest Perceptions and Insights study. And it's a routine study we conduct every 2 years with, and again, as a way to track trends in public perceptions and patient attitudes around clinical research. So we're very excited to bring this study here to you today. And I have a couple of special guests with me, and we'll just spend a minute or so just with introductions. And so again, my name is Anique de Bruin. I'm the Chief Research and Insights Officer at CISCRP. And I'm here with my colleagues Emily and Rebecca. Emily, I'll turn it over to you for a brief introduction.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Clifford, and I'm one of the senior project managers on the research services team at CISCRP. So excited to be here with you all. Thanks for joining. Rebecca.
Thanks, Emily. Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Nordland. I am also a senior project manager on CISCRP's research services team, and very excited to share some of our P&I study results with you today.
Great. Thanks so much. Emily and Rebecca are going to help me present some of the highlights of the study today. But we also are very honored. We have a panel discussion planned for us a little bit later in the session, and we have two special guests here today. So Jackie, if you don't mind just introducing yourself and a little bit about you.
Sure. I'm Jackie. I am, as it says, an MS and IBD patient leader. I have been working with CISCRP now for a few years on various projects. I've also participated in clinical trials myself, so I'm excited to talk about that in regard to this research.
Great. Thanks so much for being here, Jackie. And Twyla.
Hi there. My name is Twyla Bodie. I am a clinical research nurse coordinator up here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, where I got to drive in the snow this morning, our first snowfall of the season. So that's always fun for us here. We are a balmy 20 degrees Fahrenheit -6. And so happy to be inside, warm and cozy with some coffee for the next little bit of time here with you all.
And thank you so much for joining us. And Twyla and Jackie are going to be wonderful guests a little bit later, and we're going to have a discussion around some of the implications of some of these insights. So thank you so much. What we'll do next, we have a very packed agenda for you today. We'll go through and tell you a little bit more about the study and some of the methodology that we used. And then we have the results segmented out into several different sections. The first one being general awareness and perceptions of clinical research and the decision to participate. What are some of those informational elements that are critical to that decision-making process? And then we'll talk about preferences when it comes to participating in clinical research in terms of, do they have preferences in terms of the clinics they want to visit? We also have some questions that we asked around decentralized clinical trial elements. We also had some questions around a potential pharmacy model, which we're happy to share with you some of those perceptions today. And then finally, the last section is our participation experiences section, where we'll talk about a subset of the respondents to our survey who actually participated in a clinical trial, and share some of the insights from their experiences. And then, as I mentioned, we'll close out with a panel discussion. So a little bit of background about our study. So we have, we've been doing this since 2013. It's a survey questionnaire where we keep a lot of the questions similar, obviously, in order for us to be able to track trends. But we do incorporate new topic areas as we that are relevant in our industry. And we work together with a work group to develop the questionnaire. This year it was disseminated between April and June 2023. We want to extend a big thank you to our collaborators and helping to get this survey out to different patients and the public. So Clarinet, James Lind Care, Benchmark Research, and Rare Patient Voice, just a special thank you to you for your assistance in getting this important study out there. Great news, we were able to reach over 12,000 responses. So this was super exciting. Just a little bit of background in terms of who we spoke with. And again, just a little bit of trended data here. 2023 on the right, a couple of highlights. One of the wonderful things about the study this year, we were really able to get a nice representation from Europe, which we've been trying to do. So we have a little bit of a more balanced view from North America and Europe. And given that we had such a large sample size, we do have a nice representation from South America and Asia Pacific and Africa, some of those other regions. This year we had 81% white representation. However, again, because of the large sample size, we do have a pretty robust sample size numbers from some of those underrepresented communities. So that was really great. And then we also had a mix of education levels as well. We also gathered a lot of additional demographic information and household size. So again, the broader, we'll just cover the highlights today, but the broader study does contain a lot of subgroup analyses that we're looking into right at this moment. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Rebecca, and she'll go through some of the general awareness and perceptions. Rebecca?
Thanks, Anik. All right, so to start off with just a couple of highlights related to general clinical research awareness and perceptions. Overall, general perceptions of clinical research have remained relatively steady compared to prior years, and the majority of respondents still perceive clinical research as safe. And while awareness of clinical research has generally remained at similar levels over the years, most are still not discussing clinical research with their doctors, unfortunately. And then looking more so at what factors could really build trust in pharmaceutical companies or organizations that run clinical studies, respondents cited transparency and the use of patient engagement practices as some of those top factors. And looking at results from more specific subgroups, Black or African American and Hispanic respondents additionally noted that the employment of diverse staff and the enrollment of diverse participants in their clinical studies as particularly important for increasing their trust in pharmaceutical companies. So to start, we just wanted to compare some data points between this year's study and prior years related to clinical research awareness and perceptions. So general understanding of clinical research has remained at relatively high levels over the years, as you can see. We did see a very slight increase from 2021 to 2023, with 91% this year of those who have never participated in a clinical trial reporting that they understand the term clinical trial or clinical research study very well or somewhat well. And then in terms of perceptions of safety, we've seen a similar trend here. So 92% this year reported that they believe clinical trials are very or somewhat safe among those who have never participated before. And then looking at discussion of clinical trials with one's doctor and consideration of clinical trials as a treatment option, this has remained relatively low over the years, though we did see an increase of a few percentage points this year compared to all prior years, with 34% reporting that they have discussed or consider clinical trials very often or somewhat often with their doctor. And then finally, just looking at overall awareness of currently recruiting or ongoing clinical trials, this has been consistently mixed over the years as well. We have a little more than half this year reporting that they have heard or seen a clinical trial that is recruiting in the last 6 months, with 58% reporting yes. And then looking a bit more deeply into those factors that could, again, build trust or increase trust in pharmaceutical companies and organizations that conduct clinical trials. Again, the top mentions here are really related to transparency. So number one being the company sharing more information about the health risks and benefits of their medicines, with 64% of respondents mentioning this. And then that was closely followed by the company sharing more information about the clinical research that has already been done on their medicines, 53%. And then two new top mentions this year that we thought was very interesting. And these are, again, related to patient engagement. One being knowing that the company actively works with patients, caregivers, and patient communities to make clinical research studies easier to participate in. 51% mentioned this as a top factor. And then additionally, by the company sharing information in patient-friendly language that they could easily understand was also a top mention at 48%. So definitely interesting from our perspective to see those patient engagement factors rising to the top here. And looking at some more specific subgroup differences, Black or African American respondents' trust in pharmaceutical companies was more likely to be increased by knowing that the company employed staff that was diverse and that the company included a diverse set of participants in their clinical trials. And then looking at Hispanic respondents, their trust in pharmaceutical companies was more likely to be increased by knowing the company employed staff that was diverse as well. And then moving on to look a bit more at factors that are involved in deciding to participate, willingness to participate, and then information that patients generally desire when considering trial participation. We can start with a few highlights. So overall, more are generally willing to participate in clinical trials in 2023 compared to prior years, with respondents in North America and Europe being more willing than respondents from other regions. However, slightly fewer were actually asked to participate in trials in 2023 compared to 2021. And among those who were asked to participate, there was a slight increase in being asked to participate by one's doctor compared to 2021. And then looking at the information that's really critical to participation decision-making, some of those top mentions were knowing potential risks and benefits, the purpose of the study, how the investigational treatment is believed to work, as well as knowing what procedures are involved, potential out-of-pocket costs for the participant, as well as the physical location of the study clinic in the overall study duration. So looking overall at willingness to participate in clinical trials, we have a comparison here from the two prior studies, so in 2019 and 2021. And as you can see, trend has remained relatively similar, but this year we did see a slight increase in that strong willingness to participate. So this year we had 40% report they would be very willing to participate and 47% somewhat willing. And then looking at some subgroup differences here as well, Asian respondents were more likely to indicate being not at all willing or not very willing than all other races. And then looking at different regions, overall, North America and Europe respondents were more willing than those from other regions to take part in a clinical trial. North American respondents were more likely to indicate very willing to participate than respondents from all other regions. And European respondents were more likely to indicate somewhat willing than respondents from all other regions. And then taking a look at the information that's really important for that clinical trial decision-making process, we broke this down into two parts. So this first here looks at information related to the purpose and design of the study. And then the next slide, we have information related to logistics of the study. But here are some of the higher importance or factors that respondents would be more likely to consider when considering participation in a trial related to the purpose and design. So here again, potential risks and benefits, number one, closely followed by the purpose of the study. And then a couple of others that were important here, information about the study drug that's being researched, including what type of therapy it is, how it's believed to work. And then additionally, results and information from prior phases or prior research done on this same study drug. Understanding how one's confidentiality, including contact information and medical results, would be protected. And then additionally, if they would receive a summary of the study results after their participation ended. And looking at some subgroup differences here, Black or African American respondents were more likely to report the following items as being very important for them compared to all other races when considering trial participation. And those include information about the sponsor, knowing other clinical trial participants are diverse, knowing the staff conducting the study are diverse, knowing how their confidentiality would be protected, and additionally knowing that patients and caregivers had provided feedback on the study design. And then looking at those information pieces related to logistics specifically, some of the top mentions here that respondents would be most interested in or think were most important when considering participation are the types and number of medical procedures required, potential costs and reimbursements, the physical location of the research study center, and potentially how close that is to their home or their workplace. And then also looking at the length of participation in the clinical research study. So what time commitment would be required from them from the start to end of the study. And looking at some of the subgroup differences here as well, North American respondents were more likely to report all of the following as being very important to them compared to all other regions. So the location of the study center, the length of participation, number and duration of study visits, medical procedures required, flexible visit scheduling, remote visits, and potential costs and reimbursements. So for North American respondents, definitely seems like factors related to convenience, time commitment, what amount of burden will be put on them are particularly important. And then just looking here at some factors, again, related to diversity. So we did have Hispanic and Black and African-American respondents more likely to indicate very important for having diverse staff and participants. So clearly, this information is very important to them when making this participation decision. And then European respondents were least likely to indicate it was very important to have diverse staff and participants. But, our hypothesis is that this is just a matter of the population in Europe and just what's sort of, rising to the top as issues in their communities. But again, as you can see here from the chart, still largely important across the board. So we had about half or more indicate that it would be very or somewhat important to know that staff conducting the study and other clinical trial participants are diverse and representative. And then I'll turn it to Emily for some findings related to engagement preferences.
Thanks, Rebecca. Great. Alrighty, so starting off on this highlight slide. So similar to previous years, the receptivity to various types of decentralized clinical study models remains high. As in 2021, no single DCT model prevails, and the availability of options will remain key, particularly for those underrepresented communities to help increase access to these trials. The level of comfort with various study clinic settings is variable, with the supermarket setting identified as least comfortable compared to local hospitals, labs, and community health clinics. Home settings were perceived as particularly comfortable among Black and North American respondents compared to other race and region respondents. While most were generally willing to go to a pharmacy for study visits, there were concerns about facilities, data privacy, and the quality of care they would receive in that type of setting. Knowing that the staff was properly trained and also that the privacy measures were optimized were key to increasing the trust in pharmacy settings for clinical studies. Most were just comfortable with simple assessments such as vital signs, general physical exams, and questionnaires in this type of setting compared to more invasive tests or assessments. And finally, the key long-term retention factors for clinical studies included regular communication, access to local study clinics, and compensation. Okay, as I mentioned on that last slide, there's a continued strong willingness to participate in a range of clinical study models. So the most kind of popular model that we have on this slide is the hybrid model, where 86% of respondents mentioned that they would be somewhat or very willing to participate in a clinical trial of this nature. Closely followed by the traditional model, where 84% were somewhat or very willing. Then the mobile nurse model with 81% somewhat or very willing. And finally, the fully remote model, where 80% of respondents were somewhat or very willing. And to note, the Black respondents were significantly more likely to report very willing for all types of these models compared to other race subgroups. Looking into the study features that were of particular importance in clinical research. So the top mentions here for those who have never participated in a clinical trial before, the most important at 47% of respondents was being provided with supporting information on the clinical research study, followed by being provided with supporting information on managing my health condition in general at 45%, supportive services, so help with reimbursement of travel or travel arrangements at 39%. And at number 4, availability of a clinical research study clinic in my local community or neighborhood at 36%. This was very similar to 2021 findings, where the number 1 response was information on managing my condition, followed by supporting information on the study and the opportunity to complete a satisfaction being the top mentions. Looking at the subgroup breakdowns, Hispanic and Black subgroups were more likely to cite almost the majority of answers here as very important compared to non-Hispanic and white subgroups. Looking at different locations for clinical trial participation. So as I mentioned before, the local supermarket was perceived as the least comfortable setting for clinical study visits compared to all other settings. You can see in terms of comfort levels at different locations, the number 1 mention was the local diagnostic lab, closely followed by their local hospital or a local health clinic. Looking at the subgroup breakdowns over here, so Black respondents were more likely to cite very comfortable receiving care at the home setting, the local supermarket, and the local pharmacy compared to all other races. And those in North America were more likely to cite very comfortable at home compared to those in South America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Diving a little bit deeper into the pharmacy setting for clinical trials. So while most were generally willing to go to a pharmacy, there were concerns about facilities, data privacy, and the quality of care they would receive in this type of setting. So looking at the breakdown, 46%, so almost half of respondents were very willing to participate in a clinical research study at a pharmacy. So it could be a local chain like or a national chain like CVS or Walgreens. 38% were somewhat willing, and a very small percentage, 11 and 4%, were not very or not at all willing to participate in this type of study. Of those who were unwilling to participate at a local or at a pharmacy, the top mentions for reasons why not were concerns about the facilities. That was the number 1 concern at 63%. So that type of setting being too public or not having a separate private room or area to complete their visit. Second, mentioned here at 52% that they were concerned about their privacy or confidentiality, concerns about the quality of care at 49%, and finally at 42% concerns that they would not get the answers to questions that they have. Looking at the subgroup breakdown, so non-Hispanic respondents were more likely to report very willing to go to a pharmacy location for a clinical trial compared to Hispanic respondents. And Black respondents were more likely to report very willing compared to Asian and all other races. However, there were no significant differences between with the white respondents. And finally, those in North America were more likely to cite very willing to attend a clinical trial visit at a pharmacy compared to those in all other regions. Okay, looking at the breakdown of a national chain versus local pharmacy. So there was really no variation in trust between these national chains and local pharmacies. However, proper training and privacy measures were really key for increasing trust in this type of setting for a clinical study. So you can see the breakdown here, very similar levels of trust. You can see for a local independent pharmacy, 47% of respondents reported that they trust this type of pharmacy some, and 32% mentioned that they trust this type of pharmacy a lot. And then very similarly, the large national chain pharmacies, 50% responded that they trust this type of pharmacy some, and 31% trust them a lot. ways to increase the willingness to go to a pharmacy for a study visit. So top mention here at 66%, knowing that the pharmacy staff was properly trained, 57% having better privacy measures in place. So, having a separate room rather than just using a privacy screen, 49% being provided with supporting information on the clinical research study, 43% being provided information on how their confidentiality would be protected, and finally, at 43% again, knowing the credentials of the pharmacy staff conducting the tests and procedures. Okay, and then looking at retention factors. So they were asked to rank, these different types of retention factors in order of importance, or in order of things that would most likely keep them enrolled in a clinical research study and not drop out. So the top mentions here were feeling or seeing a benefit from the study drug at number 1, followed by, having the ability to complete study visits closer to home, such as the local lab, having study visits with flexible times, or being informed of the clinical research process on a regular basis. Pretty similar to the 2021 findings. So those top mentions were, again, at number 1, feeling and seeing a benefit from the study drug, followed by being informed of the clinical research process on a regular basis and having study visits with flexible times. Great. Now I'm going to go into my last section, which is on the confidence of identifying a clinical study and reasons for non-participation. So a few highlights to point out here. So as in the prior years, the majority of respondents generally were confident that they could find or that they could identify a clinical study that is a good fit for them. Outside of their doctor, online resources or connections with patient advocacy groups were typically identified as the first step taken to identify a clinical study. However, there is still confusion about out-of-pocket expenses and general medical costs associated with participation. However, there was, more confusion amongst the younger respondents compared to the older respondents in this study. Finally, there's a large pool of patients that are willing to participate in a clinical research study, but have not yet been connected to an appropriate study for them. So some who have tried to participate did not qualify and are still searching for an appropriate clinical study. And others who have never participated indicated that they, are not aware of studies that are right for them. Okay, so as I mentioned on that last slide, most were confident that they could find a clinical study that was a good fit for them. So you can see on the left here, 28% reported that they were very confident, followed by, 46% saying somewhat confident, not very confident at 22%, and finally not at all confident at 4%, which is pretty similar to the 2021 findings as well. Looking at the subgroup breakdowns over here, so those in North America and Africa were more likely to report that they were very confident compared to those in South America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Hispanic respondents were more likely to report very confident compared to the non-Hispanic respondents. And Black respondents were more likely to report very confident compared to white, Asian, and all other race respondents. As I mentioned before, it's very consistent with the 2021 findings, where 27% were very confident, 49% somewhat confident, 20% not very confident, and 3% not at all confident. And then finally, one of our new subgroup breakdowns was household size, as Anik mentioned earlier. And for this finding, those whose household size is more than 5 people were more likely to report very confident compared to those who live alone, have a household size of 2 or 3. Outside of a doctor, many of the respondents would turn to online sources or a patient advocacy group first to identify a clinical study. So you can see here on the left. So we asked them, what would be that first step in finding a clinical research study other than talking to your doctor? 36% said that they would search online, 30% connecting with a patient advocacy group, and 14%, were not sure. Looking at those who mentioned that they would search online, 40% of them, so the majority of them, said that they would go to an online clinical trial registry or database maintained by the government or by your government. So, clinicaltrials.gov, something of that nature, followed, by 15% an online advertisement, 12% the PAG's website, 11% social media, and 10% a pharmaceutical company's website. As I mentioned before, there is still confusion among some regarding the medical costs and out-of-pocket costs for clinical trials. So as you can see here on the left, 60% of the respondents felt that all out-of-pocket expenses such as gas, parking, and or meals would be reimbursed by the clinical research study, and the participant is not responsible for these costs. So 60% reporting true, 40% reporting false. And then on the right here, 89% felt that all medical costs will be covered by the clinical research study. So 89% reporting true there, and 11% reporting false. And here, so many are not able to participate due to eligibility criteria and are still searching for a clinical trial. So amongst those who had tried to participate in a clinical research study before, 72% said that they did not qualify to participate. And looking at the breakdown of those respondents, 75% of them are still searching for a clinical research study that they can participate in. So the vast majority there, 15% decided to not participate in another clinical research study, and 2% ended up actually finding another clinical research study to enroll in. Okay, and over half of those who have never participated are not aware of studies that are a good fit for them. So you can see 54% reported that the reason that they have not participated in a clinical research study is that they're not aware of any studies that would be right for them. Some other top mentions here of why they've never participated: 23% do not know enough about clinical research, 19% have concerns about the risks associated with these studies, and 16% do not want to take a chance with their health. I think that wraps up my slides, so I'll turn it over to Anik.
Thanks so much, Emily and Rebecca, for recapping those sections. So I will take over from here. We'll be talking about participation experiences. So we did have a section of the survey where if they did participate in a study, we asked them about their experiences. So what we found here, a lot of consistency from past studies. People are still mostly learning about their study through various resources, despite preferring to learn from their doctor. We did delve a little bit deeper into specifically, what online resources they were using. We see a lot of social media and online advertisements mentioned. As in years past, still a lot of folks are participating for altruistic reasons. So this has been very consistent from past studies. Electronic informed consent was perceived to be the easiest to understand compared to paper and video, which was great. We did see some subgroup differences for that particular question, which I'll go into in a moment. Most completed their participation in their study. Those that didn't cited side effects and location of the study clinic as top reasons. And while compared to 2021, participation was perceived to be somewhat less disruptive and more generally in line with 2019 levels, we are hypothesizing that this might be potentially highlighting the impact of the pandemic, where people did transition in 2021 to a more DCT type model with a lot of remote type of engagements, whereas this year we are hypothesizing that a lot more folks went back to a more traditional model. However, overall, logistical factors are still perceived as burdensome, which you'll see in a moment. Again, travel, time commitment, missing work, being the top disruptors. And what we also saw was a decreased frequency in general communication while enrolled compared to 2021, as well as after communication as well. So I'll delve into those results in a moment. We collected a lot of data. I'm just, highlighting some of the points here in terms of, we collected phase of study as well as, the therapeutic area of the study that they were involved in, or indication, I should say. We did have a higher representation of interventional studies this year, as well as a higher representation of traditional studies compared to last year. So traditional meaning that they went to a clinic for their visits rather than being remote or virtual or hybrid. So the electronic informed consent form. So, basically the electronic version was perceived to be the easiest to understand. And mostly the study coordinator or obviously the principal investigator or doctor reviewed this with them. We did see some subgroup differences where those that identified as Hispanic perceived the ease of understanding to be more difficult, as well as younger participants found it more difficult compared to older folks. In terms of overall disruption, you'll see here, generally speaking, that compared to 2021, people perceived their participation to be slightly less disruptive and more in line with 2019 levels. Again, given that there was a lot of disruption, if you did participate during the pandemic, they did encounter a lot of changes and such. So again, we're hypothesizing that, they're going back to perhaps a more traditional, clinic visit, going into the clinic visit, which might have contributed to these results. And again, here, which kind of supports that theory is, having to travel to the study clinic, overall time commitment, missing work. Another thing I think we have to keep an eye on is really completing those study requirements at home, especially with those decentralized clinical trial models, really considering whether in fact we are asking them to do a lot more at home. And is, how burdensome is this, whether they're at home or versus at the clinic. And again, also interlinked with that is using technology, a lot more technology use at home, of course, downloading apps on their smartphones or using tablets, et cetera, which can also create burden for some folks as well. In terms of the various subgroups, those that identified as Hispanic, as well as Black or Asian, did mention that their participation was more disruptive. Those that were younger and those that were employed full-time also mentioned higher disruption levels, as well as those with lower education levels. Again, nothing too surprising here about what created the most burden, during their participation. You'll see a lot of logistical factors, length of study visits, traveling to the study clinic, but also, invasive assessments and lab work, again, were also to a certain extent perceived as burdensome. We added a new question this year in terms of how much time they spent at the clinic. You'll see over 50% spent, at least an hour or less. And then, we had our question similar to last year in terms of travel time, et cetera. Again, here we see a high proportion travel at least, and this is one way, 1 hour or less. So again, you double that, that's, a fairly significant amount of time. In terms of suggestions on making participation less disruptive, again, not having to travel as far, receiving compensation for time. A lot of people spend a lot of time participating and, may not get paid or compensated for the time they're missing at work, et cetera. Again, virtual visits, having home visits and such, and having travel assistance could certainly help alleviate some of this burden. Again, we saw, consistent use of technology and a wide variety of different technologies used this year. Text messaging, in fact, was perceived as very helpful, again, for study visit reminders or, completing EPROs or other, things related to their study were perceived as very helpful. Smartphone apps also perceived as helpful. Supportive services, again, having that transportation or reimbursement support for parking, meals, et cetera. And again, those home office visits were also perceived to be very helpful. I mentioned, there was decreased communication levels in terms of overall communication during the study, but also after participation. So again, something to think about. And again, it could be because during the pandemic, there might have been a lot more communication and, things may have normalized a bit in 2023. We asked a question this year in terms of overall the feeling of being appreciated. And the great news is, and again, not surprising, we hear this all the time in our patient advisory boards, overall, the majority feel very appreciated. And, the critical role of the study staff in shaping the experiences is hugely helpful. So, 75%, 3/4 mentioned receiving words of appreciation from the study staff, and 49% felt this was very helpful. And then some other, things that were perceived as helpful: thank you cards, participation in satisfaction surveys. And while a few 5% only, mentioned receiving a certificate to recognize their participation, 52%, did find that to be helpful as well. So those things are, perceived as meaningful to participants. Overall, everybody, generally speaking, felt, it met or exceeded expectations, and generally it was the same or somewhat better than the standard of care they would have otherwise received. So again, very consistent with last year. I think overall experiences are generally very positive. Again, I mentioned the potentially normalizing of conditions, even though there are still obviously a lot of DCT elements that are being carried over and are part of kind of the new clinical trials landscape. There are, things to watch out for. How much are we asking people to do at home? And how can we best work together to kind of minimize the disruption and burden to participants in our clinical trials. And again, keeping that communication going, not only while enrolled, really helps with retention factors, but of course, obviously, keeping them engaged after the study ends is very important as well. Improving some of these findings, of course, can help improve access. Some of those subgroup findings and some of those preferences when it comes to some of those underrepresented communities are really important to pay attention to make clinical trials more inclusive going forward. Again, overall experiences are very positive, but again, highlighting the logistical factors, and again, that technology and other elements that we're offering at the moment can positively impact experiences. And again, mixed reactions to the pharmacy model as a clinical study site setting. And I think there was a question about urgent care settings. We didn't particularly go into that setting, but certainly something to keep in mind for future studies. So without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen, because I'd love to bring our Jackie and Twyla in to kind of discuss the implications of some of these findings. And maybe I'll open it up to Jackie or Twyla. What did you think of some of these results? Did anything resonate with your experiences, either Jackie as a clinical trial participant or Twyla as a study coordinator?
I think for me as a coordinator, what really stood out is that there's sort of this back and forth between I like the home visits, I don't like the home visits. So I think there are a portion of the population who the home visits and that part really worked for, and then there's a population that it really doesn't work for. And here in a more rural and remote setting, we find the technology for home really doesn't work, and so we've missed out on capturing some important data for some of our patients who had this conversion to remote visits and remote data collection, where the technology really didn't work in areas where you might not have Wi-Fi, because those actually still do exist in a lot of places in the world, actually. And so if you're in metropolitan United States, you don't think about those things maybe, but if you get we have some patients who drive 5 hours one way for a study visit. And so their remote areas don't have good connectivity. So I think it's interesting, because the traditional model in those first slides is still the second most popular and very close to that traditional method versus the hybrid model. Very close in numbers, and so sometimes I think we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it's all or nothing. So giving patients actually a bit more choice in, do you want to come for visits or do you want home visits? And again, those home visits become far more difficult as well when you're living somewhere remote. So even though we say that we have home health services, do we have home health services that they're willing to drive the 5 hours one way? So that was the thing that really stuck out to me the most, is that, you know, a lot of those questions, what would make it less burdensome are having more home visits. But then you look at is home visit important, and it's only like 20%. So that really stood out to me, that it's sort of that back and forth. For us as a site, it has been extremely burdensome as a site to do home visits in a rural setting.
And the burden being having the nurses go all the way out to people's homes.
Finding those services, right? Because they're
Yeah.
always third party. So it's not about me getting in my car and going, which really isn't an option at all, but finding staff who are willing to do that. And so you know, the sponsor might say, we've got a third party vendor, and I'm like, but do you really? And then when push comes to shove, they don't really. And then it falls to the site. You know, it might be the day before and we hear from a nurse, oh, I'm sorry, I can't get to that visit. You'll have to do it. And it's like, well, that's absolutely not an option, right? So I already have a full-time job here in clinic. I'm not going to be able to drive 5 hours one way, so 10 hours, you know, to do a visit. So again, logistics, and the logistics with the technology really hasn't caught up. I think for our remote locations. And so we do have patients who spend a lot of time on help phones, like on the help desk. That's not very helpful. And we experience that here in clinic as well. So a lot of those that you have, you know, technology that is maybe designed and tested in a more metropolitan area, and no one's ever taken it, you know, out into the country 5 hours, because their country might not have a place that's 5 hours from a major metropolitan area.
Right.
But that's what Canada and sort of the American sort of that western, that northwest, you know, you get into Montana, North Dakota, you can drive a long way without seeing a city.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And Jackie, what about you? Anything surprise you, especially given your trial experience?
There was so much good info in there, and I took notes, but I wish I could literally go point by point by point. But one of the big ones that I wrote down, like on the top of my paper, was that 72% didn't qualify for a study. 72% of willing people could not qualify. And that was so huge, because I run into that a lot myself. Because of my health history, I have 2 conditions. I'm like ready to go on research for all of them, but something along the way has disqualified me. And I think that that is very telling, particularly combined with the fact that so many of the Black or Hispanic, or in that one slide that said that they confidently say they can find a study that will match with them. And we know across the board that those are underrepresented populations within clinical trials, that it's mostly based on white people and their data. So we have 72% of people, a huge portion of our minority groups, that just can't get into a study. And I think that is bananas, because we need more of them. So it's, what are we doing to disqualify? And to me, the undertone of all of this is the lack of trust in our medical system from the people in those communities, because they said in the survey, they know they know they're safe. They're not worried about this. They're not worried about that. They're ready to go. But obviously, as we can see again in those results, lack of representation on the study site, lack of transparency about who works on the study, all of those obviously matter. So
Yeah.
the other thing that I thought was like really, really awesome, based on the work that I do in advocacy, is that 51% said that they wanted to know that these companies work with patients on the trial. So that was really validating for me in terms of like advocacy work, because we know that. We know patients turn to us, could ask us questions and have value in what we say and what we learn. It's nice to start seeing that that is mattering in terms of what they're doing with their doctors. It's not like they're not separate. Doctors here, patients are here. It's this is important, and we want you guys to come to a consensus on this. And I really appreciated that. Just in general, I'm glad to see that.
That's great. What and in your thought, in your opinion, like what primary areas do you think sponsors and sites and other stakeholders should focus on, going forward to help alleviate burden, increase access? Any thoughts there? And, again, based on all the advocacy work potentially that you're doing. And
I have an unpopular opinion, which is that
that's okay.
I think that they need to kind of go back to the beginning on a lot of this, because what we're seeing, particularly again in these minority communities, is they want people who look like them and know their experience at the study. They want people who look like them and know their experience at the study sites. And they want people who look like them and know their experience designing the study itself. So we're going to continue to run into walls of recruiting these patients until they start seeing this work being done. And then it becomes chicken or the egg, right? Well, if we get enough people enrolled, then other people will see that they're enrolled and then they'll want to be enrolled. No, that's not going to happen. We need to do all the stuff before they get enrolled. And so I think there's so much stuff they can do, but it's going to take time and money and investment in this area. And I just don't know if anybody's going to do that. Because why would they? They're getting enough white participants to complete their studies and like, check, done, that's fine.
What about you, Twyla? What do you think sponsors can do better to help optimize the patient clinical trial experience? You mentioned, having options, anything else, and especially also to help support your site, of course, better.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting, Jackie, because I also, had this increased diversity point, because that was a lot of the slides, though the reality is I come from a very non-diverse spot. So Saskatchewan as a province has like 75% of us in this entire province are white European settlers. That's just what you've got here. So for us, it's about actually increasing the Aboriginal population. Here it would be our biggest, right? In the US, you see a lot of Hispanic, not Hispanic. I mean, it's actually captured in our CRFs. And we have a different delivery system for healthcare here as well. So that does change things a bit for us. But we definitely don't see diversity here as well. And it is something to keep in mind, though, again, we come from a very homogeneous population. But for me, again, we're spending a lot of money on the technology and a lot of those things. And I think patients clearly said too, it would be nice to be reimbursed for my time. Right? So we do reimburse for travel here, but maybe instead of, spending, paying a nurse $50 an hour to travel for like 12 hours to do a visit, we could actually compensate the patient for 2 or 3 hours of their time. Be far cheaper. Where I live, that would be far cheaper. And that would actually, really a $20 or $50 stipend for a half day of someone's time almost feels like a little bit of a slap in the face. Like it really is like, you know what? You don't appreciate my time, especially from a monetary standpoint. I know what I make an hour. I know what my time is worth. And that's what I think when I'm doing surveys for, someone, or someone phones my house. I'm like, sorry, I don't have time for this right now. But really, we're asking a lot of time from people, and we don't compensate their time. And for a lot of studies, it can be significant. A lot of the studies that I do, the patients are here for 3 to 4 to 5 hours in one visit.
That's the study that I was on. It was a 46-hour period every time we were there. And I'm with you. That was my biggest hesitation on joining the study, was the time commitment, because I had to go every month, and that was a long period. I was actually really surprised to see the slide that talked about that so few of them were that long. They were like 30 minutes or less or an hour or less. I was like, oh, that's no big deal. Like when you got to sit there, I mean, they built into the day, you come at this time, then you break for lunch. You can go get lunch because we know you're here all day long. Then you come back. And it was like, I mean, some of that I think could have been designed better.
And how would you propose designing it better?
So there were part of the reason why the break was because they had to call the pharmacy once I was at the appointment, have them do the pharmacy magic and then deliver it and then finish the visit. And I know there's a reason for that. It was part of the blind part of the study, right? They're mixing there, bringing here, but and they didn't want to mix it until they were confirmed I was at the appointment. So I understand that, but there's still this part of me that was like, do I really need to break for an hour and a half in the middle of our day for that? Like, how is there not a better solution than this?
Right. No, absolutely. And how about in terms of like retention and keeping folks engaged, you know, throughout some of these, especially like long-term follow-up periods? You know, what are some of the things that you do at your site, Twyla, to keep folks engaged?
You know, it's interesting because it's, you know, near the end, and it talks about the things like, you know, a thank you card or the end of the, I don't do any of that, which makes me think maybe I should. Now, on the flip side, if you enroll in a clinical trial and I am your coordinator, you have my cell phone number. And that's a cell phone that I carry with me 24/7. And so I think for me and for my site and for the PIs that I work for, that easy access to the PI, I mean, it's one step away, but they actually really on any given day at any moment have access to us. And I think that relationship building is really important. I have done clinical research trials now I'm entering my 24th year. Here in September, I rolled over to my 24th year, and I can actually say I have never in my career lost a patient to follow-up. I've done a lot of trials for a lot of different areas for a lot of different physicians. And so I think that works. So really it's about communication, and it's about frequent communication. So even though I might only see a patient every month, I might still be engaging on some level. And I love the texting for that, truly and honestly, as a form of communication that didn't exist 24 years ago. But I love to be able to just send a quick text. How you doing this week? How are things going? Reminders that this is what you need to bring to your next appointment. That part is very quick, very easy, and I do like that. I also like that studies are going to apps. I mean, if we're going to do the technology, I'd rather have it be an app than a separate device. Because at least with an app, most people, and not all, and again, we have to remember that not all people have a phone, if you can imagine. And so that part of it, though, really that everything's on their own phone, is certainly helpful. And I have seen a difference with that versus a sponsor provided provision device.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, believe it or not, we're almost at time, and I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to Twyla and Jackie for your sharing your thoughts and being so honest and transparent. And I apologize, we haven't had a chance to go through the Q&As, but we'll send out the meeting deck. I just wanted to also just share out that we will be posting the final reports up on the CISCRP website in November. And also wanted to just have a shout out here to all of our work group members and collaborators on getting the survey out. So I just wanted to say thank you here again. And like I said, please look out for the Perceptions and Insights study reports to be uploaded to the CISCRP website. Feel free to reach out to myself, Emily, or Rebecca with any questions. And thanks again, Twyla and Jackie, and thank you for all of our attendees for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.